Strait of Hormuz Report. May 8 morning briefing. Roughly 1,500 commercial vessels carrying 2,500 mariners are now trapped inside the Persian Gulf. And Iran's blockade of global shipping is extracting an unbearable cost from every nation that depends on the strait. The International Maritime Organization stated openly there is no precedent for the stranding of so many seafarers in the modern age. And 26 South Korean vessels alone remain stuck in the waterway with no clear way out. The Strait of Hormuz normally carries 25% of global seaborne oil and 20% of global liquefied natural gas. With more than 120 commercial ships transiting per day before the war began on February 28. As of early April, the strait was moving just 3.8 million barrels per day in crude, natural gas liquids, and refined product loadings, compared to over 20 million barrels per day in February before the conflict, which the IEA calls the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Brent crude opened the war at roughly $80 per barrel, climbed to a 2026 peak of $114.44 on May 4, and is trading at $101.26 this morning, up 1.2% overnight. West Texas Intermediate is up 0.88% overnight to $95.64. Gasoline at the U.S. pump has risen $1.16 per gallon since the war began, and jet fuel has spiked 95% across North America. Now the question every American is asking: why is the United States paying these prices when we are an energy superpower with abundant domestic production? The answer is brutal and simple. Oil is a globally priced commodity, and U.S. barrels do not stay home. They flow to the highest bidder on the world market. U.S. fuel exports just hit an all-time record of 8.2 million barrels per day, with diesel exports leading the surge as Europe and Asia scramble to replace the supplies disrupted by the Strait of Hormuz crisis. Every barrel American producers ship overseas at premium wartime pricing is a barrel that does not relieve domestic gasoline demand. And the global price sets the floor for what American consumers pay at the pump. The cumulative damage to global oil exports has exceeded 13 million barrels per day, with 360 million barrels lost in March and another 440 million barrels projected lost in April. Global oil supply collapsed by 1 million barrels per day in March alone. OPEC Plus production fell 9.4 million barrels per day month over month. And refining margins from the Middle East to Asia got hammered as feedstock dried up. Asia bears 84% of the burden because that is where 84% of the Strait of Hormuz crude was destined. And China, India, Japan, and South Korea combined consumed 69% of the strait's crude flows. In 2024, Europe is in a separate kind of pain. 12 to 14% of European LNG comes from Qatar via the Strait of Hormuz. And those flows have been in chaos since Qatar Energy declared force majeure in early March. The Persian Gulf produces over 30% of the world's urea exports. Roughly 30% of internationally traded fertilizer normally transits the Strait of Hormuz. And food price inflation is now in the queue right behind the energy shock. The Center for Economic Policy Research model now projects U.S. headline inflation will rise 0.6 percentage points and core inflation 0.2 percentage points in 2026, even under the optimistic assumption that the strait reopens within 1 quarter. If the Strait of Hormuz closure persists 3 quarters, the same model has headline inflation rising 1 1 percentage points and Brent staying above $80 per barrel through the entire year. Goldman Sachs and other major desks have warned Brent could push past $110 if disruption persists. And worst-case scenarios put crude as high as $120 to $130 per barrel. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Caine briefed Tuesday that more than 100 American aircraft are patrolling the skies over the Strait of Hormuz and over 15,000 American service members are now actively engaged in opening the waterway. Caine described U.S. forces as a wall of steel, the largest military commitment in the region in decades. Yet only 4 ships made the transit on Project Freedom Day 1 versus the 120 per day average before the war. Shipping companies and insurance underwriters are still not satisfied. War risk premiums for the Strait jumped from 125% of insured value before the war to between 0.2 and 0.4%, which is a $250,000 surcharge per voyage on a very large crude carrier. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps is forbidding passage through the Strait of Hormuz without IRGC vetting and tolls. The regime is openly extorting the world economy. And President Trump's blockade is the only thing keeping the regime from charging unlimited fees per ship. The path out is clear and Trump has stated it bluntly. The pen or the sword. Sign a permanent shutdown of uranium enrichment with full inspections or watch the B-2 stealth bombers come back to finish what they started in February. Until the regime signs and the Strait of Hormuz fully reopens with mines cleared and the IRGC stood down, oil will stay elevated and volatile. The 22,500 mariners will remain trapped. And every American filling up at the pump will pay for the mullah's refusal to stand down. Download No Mercy on Google Play, the Android alarm app that uses a QR code to force you out of bed. Set goals. Get persistent reminders. Van X, creator of No Mercy. Using No Mercy helps me publish more conservative news. So please download if you have Android. Mega only. Never socialism.